अनम्यूट करती है बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अस्सलाम वालेकुम हाउ वाज द टेस्ट it was an easy one the MCQs I think they were good enough and they were quite easy I have seen and scrolled them all and the keys and answers are with you already. And inshallah, I hope as it was a grand test, inshallah, you will have a grand result as well. Let's see about the SAQs, their keys, and next important thing we will continue, inshallah, with our lecture as well, with the management of subfertility after this key discussion. The first question regarding your SAQ was, as you have seen here, it is as you see the scenario, gravida 3 para 0 plus 2. See, in the SCQs, if you follow each and every word I would say in the statement, it's giving you a clue, it's giving you a hint, and as if you are spying inside the question as well. So each and every word is your clue. So it's gravida 3 para 0 plus 2. It means this lady a bad obstetric history. So this word even or this first option for you from this word is giving you the has a bad obstetric history. It is she's at 34 weeks, so it means it's preterm. So you see, with each word you're getting a clue. It's gravida 3 para 0 plus 2 means a bad obstetric history, and then 34 weeks mean a preterm labor, and then brought. She doesn't come herself. It means she's brought. It means she's in a state of something that which has prompted the relatives to bring her, and she is in emergency. So she is in emergency with complaint of pain in abdomen. So she has a pain in abdomen and vaginal bleeding for 2 hours. Now you see, these are the factors which are showing you the lady has a bad obstetric history. She's with a preterm labor. She is brought in emergency, so something which is an urgent thing which requires an urgency and is parts of an emergency obstetrics, and has pain in abdomen and has vaginal bleeding for 2 hours. So abdominal pain plus vaginal bleeding. If just we stay till here, it means the patient is with the main diagnosis which comes to you in your mind till this statement is that patient has an APH. Patient has an APH, antepartum hemorrhage, where there is bleeding at 34 weeks. Yeah, like before second stage of labor, bleeding at any time after the time of miscarriage is ended, like 12 weeks. From 12 weeks up till the second stage of labor, bleeding at any point in the pregnancy would be labeled as APH, antepartum hemorrhage. So the patient is having antepartum hemorrhage. Now, the further clues we are getting are from abdominal pain, this thing, because these would be part of our differential diagnosis. And what else? She's pale. It means pale looking. It means she had been anemic, plus now in pain, plus with the bleeding. So they have all contributed to the paleness she is appearing. Her blood pressure. This is important. 150 by 100. This is 150 by 100. It means the blood pressure is on upper side. The plus shows tachycardia. The abdomen is a further informative feature with us. Is it is rigid and tender. On examination, it is rigid and tender. So these are the features which, when we add up on after the mean diagnosis, when we come to further differential diagnosis, like after APH, when we come to further differentials, it comes to be keeping in view. When we make two, like if I will make a flow chart for APH, I would go into main bifurcations, that would be painless bleeding and painful bleeding. So when we say the word for painless bleeding, what comes in our mind? placenta previa. And on the other hand, when comes the pain, the bleeding with pain, uh, then the thing which comes in our mind is abruptio placenta. Yeah. So this, and the which are the further enhancing features for her is blood pressure is raised, and we know that high blood pressure is a risk factor for abruptio placenta. Plus the findings on presentation, which are also indicating in more towards it, is the abdomen, how much it is rigid or tender. So rigid and tender abdomen is also a feature of abruptio placenta. So these are the features thus which help us to make the diagnosis. So the most likely diagnosis would be abruptio placenta, placental abruption. How will you manage? So as in every case of patient in shock, what do? You ask for help, you go for ABCs, isn't it? And now, from these features, if you have reached um, 90% near to your diagnosis, then further management will be most always remember in obstetrics would be fetal plus maternal. So therefore, when we go ahead, we will go for after placental abruption, our diagnosis, and as I've told you, our justification was because it was vaginal bleeding, which was associated with abdominal pain, blood pressure was high, abdomen was tender, and fundal height was increased by 3 centimeter. This was an important thing as well. So these all the things were more towards the going for the abruptio placenta. She was pale looking and then bleeding. So what we do in the management, always don't forget, in the part of management we come across that we are going to take first the history evaluation, we are going to done the examination, and we are concerned about the fetal status as well. On ultrasound, we are going to also make sure about the placenta as well. This is very important in cases of all vaginal bleeding and APH. We are going to make sure about the site of the placenta. Not in every case of placental abruption or with the painful bleeding you will say that is placental abruption. There can be accompanying previa and abruption as well. So we have to rule out and make sure about the placental site as well. And if it comes to be placental abruption, placenta is not in the lower part of the uterus, then we are going to do a pelvic examination and assess the Bishop score, send all the baseline investigation including coagulation profile. Don't forget this, because in cases of abruptio placenta, disturbed coagulation profile or DIC is one of the leading causes of morbidity. So CBC, urine complete, hepatitis profile, blood group cross matches, and the RFT, LFTs all are mandatory. So we are catheterizing the patient for input-output monitoring, monitoring the vital signs, arrangement of 4 to 6 units of blood because we are at the risk of DIC as well, monitoring of blood pressure and control, plus an emergency cesarean section, keeping in view all the neonatal facilities. Why now? Why we and as we have assessed the Bishop score, if it is good enough, patient is near to the delivering, and it is then she can be delivered. She's about in advanced labor, good enough, but as advanced labor is not if it is not nearby or not in clearly that she is going to be delivered soon, then emergency cesarean section is the plan. Now regarding your second question, it is a 20-year-old gravida 4 para 3 34 weeks fully dilated for the last 1.5 hour. So you see, again we are getting the information. She's a multigravida. She is again at 34 weeks. She's preterm. She's fully dilated. So advanced labor, but it is for the last 1.5 hour. So these are all the information we are getting from this single line, isn't it? So on pelvic examination, what else is the vertex is +1. She is exhausted and is not pushing well. There is fetal bradycardia on CTG. So this is all the information we are getting. What we are getting: advanced labor, a multiclavida, she's preterm, headed +1, and fetal bradycardia. So what comes in your mind before just you're not going to see the question what they are asking you? It comes in your mind that she needs an expedite delivery, isn't it? And an expedite delivery at +1 would be definitely we are going to go for some sort of instrument. So This is our justification, as I have told you. And in this case, she should be delivered by forceps, now not by the vacuum, because she's a preterm. So in a preterm, what we encounter is that we are at risk of intracranial hemorrhages because of the vacuum when choose if we use. So forceps is a safer option for the preterm delivery. But forceps is more associated with use of maternal, regional, or general anesthesia, perineal or vaginal trauma, postpartum hemorrhage, and severe pain at 24 hours. So these are the complications which we can encounter. So a 20-year-old priming gravida is admitted in labor ward at 32 weeks gestation with convulsions. This is the third question. Now you see 20 years old. What we're information we are getting from the age, that plus the same thing we get at 32 weeks with convulsion. So this line gives us as information the age, the parity, patient in labor ward, at preterm gestation, and convulsions. So whenever this is always to keep in your mind that convulsions in pregnancy, until unless proved otherwise, are eclampsia. So this information is giving you a diagnosis of uh, eclampsia, and further potentiating factors are that a younger patient, we know that eclampsia the risk is more in the younger age group. She's at 32 weeks. So on examination, now we come for the examination findings. 180 by 120 millimeter of mercury, so it is on a very higher side. The blood pressure, symphysia fundal height is 28 centimeter. It means, you see, 32 weeks gestation, 28 centimeter. It is lesser of it. Fetal heart sound are positive, and on investigation, protein urea was found to be +3. So these are all the justifications which are going in the favor of eclampsia, plus with IUGR, because 32-week gestation when the fundal height is 28 centimeter. Then the steps of management, what would be it? The same as I've told you, in all the emergent conditions, we need to have the stabilization of the patient. The plan which we need in our mind to have is a stabilization of the patient and delivery by appropriate route. But we need to have call for help, maintain ABC, we save double IV lines, we need investigations and a blood pressure profile with RFT, LFT, urine complete, PTA, PTT. Anticonvulsant therapy, the most important and the most common one is magnesium sulfate. And the doses, we should be knowing the loading dose is about 4 gram, followed by the maintenance dose of 1 gram per hour. And antihypertensives in the form of hydralazine or labetalol to control the blood pressure. Fluid electrolyte balance should be maintained. And the delivery is planned after stabilization, after assessment of Bishop's score. And cesarean section for obstetrical indications only is indicated. The fourth question for you was about a 30-year-old Gravity Para 2 plus 0 who visits the anti-clinic clinic at 38 weeks gestation with reports showing she is HCV positive. So she is HCV positive. Uh, she's 33 years old, multigravida. She's at 38 weeks. It means she's at term. And now she is HCV positive. So enlists its routes of transmission and long-term consequences. What we need to know is the routes of transmission. What are the routes of transmission of hepatitis C? I think you are more knowing it well from your medicine awards as well. It is parenteral, mucosal, and sexual. So these are all the routes for its transmission, and the long-term consequences. I always remember them with the C: hepatitis C, so liver cirrhosis and hepatocellular carcinoma leading to liver failure. So these are its long-term consequences. The important thing related to obstetrics is what precautions should be taken during her delivery and how to manage the lactation. So in this case, we need to have during the delivery of the patient who is suffering from hepatitis C, we need to have for medical personnel we wear double gloving, goggles, mask, and shoe covers. So because so that we are not in contact with the secretions of the mother like liquor, like blood, urine, or feces. And for the patient, there should be separate instruments for Hep C patients. This is very important, very important that for the Hep C patients, the instruments should be separated. Even if they go for we have to have an cesarean section, even the anesthesia machines should be separate for the hepatitis C patients or the B1. All linen should be disposable. Patients suffering from hepatitis C can breastfeed their baby. This is very important. After the delivery, the thing which we need to emphasize and have in counseling is that they are safe enough to breastfeed their babies, and the breastfeeding is to be provided if the nipples are cracked. So it means the if they're like cracking of the nipples, so we are at the risk that any contact of blood may affect the fetus as well. So otherwise the breastfeeding is safer enough. So the important thing of you were the important questions in your test were regarding the first one was the main objectives of our test was to cover with you the critical conditions in obstetrics that were like as was discussed in the question number one was about APH and especially about placental abruption. I think by now you have again revised in your mind and you have become now uh, emphasized upon it that what are the different presentations with placental abruption and how do we approach a patient with placental abruption. A secondly important thing was about instrumental delivery, and I hope now you have a clear view in your mind. Again, it is emphasized about the use of both modalities of instrumental delivery and when and where they are justified. And the third is the one of the most important and the drastic and the complication and the one of the nightmare of obstetrics is eclampsia, which about which you should have a clear knowledge about its anticipation, its management. And the third is a common thing which is prevalent in our society these days is the hepatitis C, and how to manage a lady with hepatitis C, where we see that every 10th person in our population is affected by hepatitis B or C. So in these cases, I think you would have by now you would have a clear view about your um, important these important topics of obstetrics. So this was the key about your SAQs. Hope you have a clear view about them now. Now let's come. I hope I know you are by now. You are tired and bored by your test, but we have to go with this lecture as a continuity of the lecture yesterday. We did yesterday. Mm, ये देखो हाँ देखो ना वो मैंने वो वाले ऑफ किया था हाँ ब्लैक तो स्टार्ट करना चाह रही थी इनको बंद कर दो ना इसको तो करो बात उधर उधर से बंद करो वो चाहिए So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This was the lecture about subfertility and infertility, which you were having yesterday with Dr. Cocker, and she discussed with you about the main factors, the investigations which are going to be have with infertility, and today, inshallah, we will continue with the management. So, the main topic today for us would be the management for infertility. So, let's see. As we have discussed already investigations, we will today start with the management, inshallah. So, regarding subfertility, today we are going to discuss about the management. Uh, I think from your previous lecture yesterday, you have in your mind that management of infertility, definitely we need to have a management protocol for the male and the female. For the both partners, we need to have a management protocol. And this can certainly and rightly be adopted after having definitely a good history and investigation, and having a complete workup of both the partners, and then having an individualized strategy for um, each of them. So the important thing, if we come to it, is the lifestyle modification, and lifestyle modification for both of them. This is important. There has to be lifestyle modification for the male and the female. Okay, this is very important. Like, uh, for instance, if the male is smoker, so stopping or quitting smoking would be definitely a helpful attribute for complete infertility. Um, Similarly, if it has the male has a sedentary lifestyle, uh, a good and healthy lifestyle, keeping in view with the exercise and regular exercise and workup will be uh, good for him. For the improvement of sperm quality, seed quality, all will be definitely improved. And even hypothalamic pituitary and central center and higher centers will have a good effect after, as we see with exercise and walk, we are always having a generalized feeling of well-being. And definitely always remember that management of infertility is not solely a medical treatment, it is a treatment of your psyche and your general approach towards the life as well. So, a male needs to have an endocrine management in some cases, um and I would rather say oblique medical management. On the other hand, surgical in case of obstructions, as we will discuss further, or they may be needing artificial reproductive techniques to help them out. When we come to the female partner, always remember the treat is related to the or directed towards the cause. So, as we have discussed with Dr. Kokab about the causes, so the most important, or I would say the main headings regarding the causes would be ovulation problems. So, the ovulation inductions can be helpful in these cases, as we will discuss in detail. Cervical factors can be treated. Uterine and tubal factors, if they are present, they should be dealt upon, and the peritoneal factors, most importantly, with them would be the endometriosis. So, these are all the factors which have to be kept in view. So, regarding the management of meal, a regular exercise, healthy diet eliminates alcohol, tobacco, and illicit drug use. And for the medical management, other we might need to be having endocrine therapy, retrograde ejaculation, which is present in cases of patients with the chronic disease in the males, like with the hypertension or diabetes, and if they are doing getting some drugs or medicines which are using, they can have these side effects. Treat the sperm autoimmunity if it is present, and treat the underlying infections of the lower genital tract in the male as well. This is very important, which can be detected by simple semen analysis if the pus cells are found more. So these are the simple measures which we can help them out. So now coming to the female, before you induce ovulation, as we discussed, the first management options for us were coming when there were ovulatory problems, it was ovulation induction. But before we induce upon ovulation induction, as I told you, a complete workup, I would like to emphasize it again and again, is mandatory. So adequate history and physical examination are essential. Exclude other causes of infertility for the male partner as well, like semen analysis, test of the tubal patency for the female, as they are indicated. So always remember, ovulation inductions only comes in power when we have ruled out the other factors. So for ovulation induction, mostly the females, they fall into the category of WHO of class 2. And what is it? Hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism. And in these cases, like, it means the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis is functioning on the lower aspect and on the milder side, and therefore ovulation is being inhibited by the gonads. So in this class, definitely ovulation induction would be a helpful one. So, and they would respond to ovulation induction. But the WHO category class 3, that is hypergonadotrophic hypogonadism, like most of the Turners or particular abnormalities of the gonads, if they fall into it, then the treatment of an ovulation is not of much help for them. And the agents which are used for ovulation induction are clomiphene citrate and the human menopausal gonadotrophins. So, if the cervical factors are involved, cervical factors in the form that, suppose if there is cervical infection, cervicitis, or there are low genital tract infections, they can affect the fertility as well. So, for those, the treatment of poor mucus may avoid the morbidity and expense of the fertility drugs. And any lower genital tract infections can be treated by doxycycline, and chronic surfacitis by the cryotherapy. But the poor mucus quality can be treated or bypassed with intrauterine insemination, IUI, intrauterine insemination. This we will discuss further in detail. Now, as we have discussed that the other important aspect was the tubal factors. What were the tubal factors? So, in the tubal factors, the isthmic corneal occlusion. What is isthmic? Isthmus is the part of the tube. As you remember the anatomy of the fallopian tube, isthmus is the part of the tube. So, isthmic and corneal, the part of the tube which is extends inside into the uterine cavity or the cornea of the uterus, it is called the corneal part. So the ischemic corneal part of the fallopian tube, if there is occlusion, then selective catheterization in proximal occlusion is considered. It is the first line therapy. These are very high and specialized procedures carried out in high-tech centers and are not of much in common practice, and I would rather say are not of much with the positive results, but they are the treatment strategies which should be in your mind as well. So clearing or occluding the obstruction, like I would say danazol in case of use of peritoneal endometriosis. The danazol is the treatment for endometriosis, used for a particular time in cases of endometriosis, as endometriosis is one of the leading cause of infertility. And then this obstruction which is caused by the adhesions can have a better effect, and thus maybe the fertility drugs or ovulation drugs will be much more helpful after the use of danazol in cases of endometriosis. Now we come to the other tubal parts. If there is any other tubal occlusions, then microsurgical resections of the hydrosalpinges in cases of PIT or reanastomosis can be associated with 50 to 60% of pregnancy rates. If the intramural portion of the tube, the intramural is which is inside the uterine cavity, is occluded, the reimplantation is required with new opening being made into the endometrial cavity. But as I have told you, these are all high-tech procedures which should be carried out in the specialized centers. Even with them, with the lesser percentages of the pregnancy rate. But always remember that at least 10% of the conception after repair of the tubal problems or the tubal diseases are ectopic pregnancies. So these were some. I wanted to give you an overview that if there are tubal obstructive problems, these can be dealt with some procedures, with high-tech procedures, and come in part of the treatment of infertility. Then come to peritoneal factors. Peritoneal factors, as I've told you, is the most common and the most important of them is the endometriosis, plus also the pelvic inflammatory diseases which have led to the adhesion. So treatment of endometriosis depend upon its extent, and if substantial adhesions or endometriomas are present, then laparoscopic surgery is preferable before we embark on upon the treatment for infertility further. So danazol, GnRH agonist, and oral medroxyprogesterone acetate are effective treatments for symptomatic disease of endometriosis. So pre-adnexal adhesions may be lyased by operative laparoscopy. Now, Coming to the unexplained infertility, accounts for about 15% of cases, and it is defined as inability to achieve conception after 12 months of trying without an identifiable cause, or 6 months if the female is older than 35 years. Now, coming to it, that if what is the estimated pregnancy rate and cost per cycle? So, cost per cycle varies in different countries, but what are the interventions we can do are the expectant management, IUI, clomiphene citrate for induction, clomiphene plus IUI, gonadotropin injection, and gonadotropin injection plus IUI, and in vitro fertilization. So these are all the options which are available for us with ovulation induction. Clomiphene citrate with intrauterine insemination would definitely have a better chance for pregnancy per cycle than clomiphene citrate alone. You can see 4 to 6 to 7 to 9% it will improve. Then gonadotropin injections and with IUI it will further enhance. And in vitro fertilization will have definitely a much better results. So we need to evaluate regarding ovulation. Tubal factors again about the uterine cavity, oocyte reserves we should be having, and the male factor is definitely to be sorted out first. So for the females, either we are going for expectant management, lifestyle modification, intrauterine insemination, IUI with ovulation induction, and IVF. So what's empiric management? The 4 cycles of clomiphene, and then IUI. This is empiric management, like 4 cycles of ovulation induction, and clomiphene is started on the third day, and in some regimes on the fifth day of the cycle, and in sometimes second day of the cycle, and then continued for the 5 days, and then the couple is advised the timed intercourse. So it is started on the second day of the cycle, continued for 5 days, and then it is comes with a dose of 50 mg with a different brand names, and then the couple is advised a timed intercourse in cases of clomiphene only. And if it is coupled with IUI intrauterine insemination, this, as we will discuss later, it has much better results. If pregnancy does not occur, then gonadotropin plus IUF or IVF is the next step. So, ovulation induction in cases of PCO. You remember, as I've told you, endometriosis, as the treatment of infertility is always individualized as related to the cause. As if the cause was endometriosis, we discussed that depends upon the extent of endometriosis, we need only to have danazol or we need to have laparoscopic adenolysis, and then we go for further IVF management as in case of endometriosis. Now we're coming to the PCO. PCO has now become a leading cause worldwide of infertility, and in these cases ovulatory problems do occur. Ovulation is definitely affected, and ovulation induction is usually the first line of management as long as the tubal patency and normal semen analysis is there. This is very important. This is very important as long as there is tubal patency and semen analysis is within the normal limits. The most common is ovulation induction agent is the clomiphene, and don't forget, yes, the metformin, which you have discussed, I know already in detail in your chapters with the secondary amenorrhea. With metformin has a very good potent effect for the ovulation as well, and which is further enhanced by ovulation induction by clomiphene citrate. So, what is the mechanism of action of clomiphene? How it induces ovulation induction? It binds to the estrogen receptors in the hypothalamus and pituitary. Thus, it blocks the normal feedback loops of estrogen and results in a surge of gonadotropin release, stimulating the ovary to recruit more follicles for maturation. Approximately 70% of women on clomiphene will ovulate, and approximately one half of these will be pregnant within 6 months of trying. The management of couple subfertility, as I have told you before, depends upon a complete workup. Uh, the important thing we have to keep in mind is the risk of multiple pregnancies with clomiphene citrate, and this can be minimized by tracking the growth of the follicles, identifying the time of ovulation, and thus it reduces the risk of multiple pregnancy. So, in cases of Clomiphene resistant cases of PCO especially, we need to have more of the metformin before we can go up to aromatase inhibitors, and then we can come to injectable and gonadotrophins. Ovulation induction can also be induced by laparoscopic ovarian drilling. This is also very important in cases of resistant cases. We go for laparoscopic ovarian drilling of the polycystic ovaries, which can result in induction of ovulation. And but in cases of an ovulation of hypothalamic origin, we need to have ovulation induction by gonadotrophin. Now coming to the surgery, what the role of surgery is in cases of uh, infertility in the female partner. You can see that minimal access techniques such as laparoscopy and hysteroscopy can be used. The important thing is, first, as we have discussed more also, I think in detail about it, is the tubal patency test. It is also a surgical procedure, minimal access surgery we are doing in cases of investigation. Minimal access surgery, laparoscopic ablation of the endometriomas, as we are doing in the cases of endometriosis. These can also further improve the chances of conception, and they are adjunct to artificial reproductive techniques like IVF. Then removal of the hydrosalpinges is very important. Can be done in cases of myomectomy. We are doing open laparotomies also. Tubal microsurgery, as I have told you before, is very important. In cases of submucosal fibroids, Asherman syndrome, hysteroscopy can be very helpful. Now coming to intrauterine insemination. In these cases, it is indicated when there is male factors of fertility, couples who have problems with intercourse, and there are 10 to 20% success rates per cycle. So it is preceded several days before by the mild stimulation with subcutaneous injections of FSH, and aiming to stimulation of the ovaries to produce 2 to 3 mature follicles, and therefore this termed as stimulated IUI. Follicular tracking is definitely done by ultrasound, and triggering of the ovulation is achieved by a subcutaneous injection of human chorionic gonadotrophin before we are giving low doses of FSH, and then triggering the ovulation by the HSG. It mimics the endogenous LH surge due to the crossover of the albus subunits of the two hormones. So this is the function of HCG. Now we're coming up to in vitro fertilization. IVF, it was originally designed for couples with tubal factor subfertility, and it was first performed in 1978 successfully. So what are the main indications for IVF? IVF is now used for almost all cases of what? With the subfertility, including tubal disease, where the reconstructive surgery has not helped us out or it is not possible. In cases of endometriosis, and it is IVF before marking on IVF, as we discussed earlier, we can use danazol or laparoscopic adenolysis as an adjunct to IVF. In cases of failed ovulation inductions, and in cases of failed IUIs. So in all these cases, IVF is our last resort. So originally it was performed in the natural menstrual cycle. Originally it was performed in the natural menstrual cycles. The use of gonadotropin controlled ovarian stimulation made IVF a much more efficient procedure. Now remember, this is very important. Gonadotropin controlled ovarian stimulation. This we will discuss further in detail. Artificial reproductive techniques are always governed and regulated, especially in the European countries, by Human Fertilization and Embryo Authority. So, as I've told you that we are going to discuss about gonadotrophin regulation. This is how we are doing the gonadotrophin regulation. I want to give you an overview about it. The pituitary down regulation is done in the IVF cycles. How we do it? That the pituitary gland is down regulated to prevent endogenous LH surges and premature ovulation. So, what is the main purpose or underlying factor why we are doing pituitary down regulation? That we want to prevent endogenous LH surges which are uncontrolled and when we are not prepared, and the premature ovulations. So for this purpose, what we are using, a GnRH agonist to use to block the FSH and LH release from the pituitary. It is the exogenous and GnRH agonist which we are using to block the endogenous FSH and LH releases from the pituitary, and even GnRH antagonist can also be used. So controlled ovarian stimulation can be carried out by using daily sub-Q doses of gonadotropin medications, which cause multiple follicle recruitment, and these are then monitored by transvaginal ultrasounds, estradiol levels, and even ultrasound measurement of endometrial thickness. So we are inhibiting the premature ovulations, and that is traditionally done by the administration of GnRH agonist or with the newer shorter GnRH antagonist protocols. This I'm repeating again and again in the slide so that you are just have clear in your mind now that how we are doing a down regulation by GnRH agonists, which are suppressing the endogenous FSH surges to have a controlled cycle. The HCG trigger, it is a surrogate for the endogenous LH surge. So when we are needing or requiring and when we are anticipating the ovulation to happen, at that time we are giving it the HCG trigger. It causes the final maturation of the egg and allows the scheduling of the egg collection procedure in cases of IVF. So egg collection, how the egg collection is done, EC. This procedure is usually performed about 37 hours post HCG trigger. When we have given in the HCG trigger, we know the ovum is ready, then the egg collection is done. And it is done by transabdominal procedures by under ultrasound control. So fertilization is performed using the prepared sperm. We have done the egg collection and now the fertilization is performed using the prepared sperm from the semen. Preparation of the semen has been done, and the prepared sperm, the fertilization is done in vitro conditions. Conventional IVF fertilization involves the insemination of around 100,000 sperms in a petri dish with an egg. So this was the conventional thing. Now, in cases of poor sperm parameters, the procedure is ICSI. The previous one was it was IVF simple, in which there was insemination of 100,000 sperms in a petri dish with an egg. But where there is a poor sperm quality, where our semen analysis has revealed a poor sperm quality, then selective sperm is injected, individualized into the cytoplasm of the oocyte, so that it has to we can help the sperm by directly injecting into the cytoplasm, so that the barriers of the oocyte and the layers in a cases of weak sperms are just they are we are overcoming them. Okay, so we are directly injecting them into the cytoplasm. So always remember, in cases of poor sperm quality, the treatment of choice is ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Fertilization is checked, and next monitoring is usually in the region of morning, and is usually in the region of 60% for IVF and 70% for ICSI. Embryo culture can be done, and embryos are incubated under strict conditions of temperature, pH, and humidity and oxygen concentration. Definitely, we need to have an optimum environment for the proper incubation of the embryo. So, what we need to have good strict conditions of temperature, pH, humidity, and oxygen concentration. Now, in the IVF, it is in vitro fertilization. What we have done, we collected the eggs, we had fertilization in vitro condition in a petri dish, and the embryo was then kept and monitored and incubated for 2, 3, or 5 days as according to the protocol, and then transferred into the uterus. This is the whole procedure. What is it again? We are doing the egg collection under controlled conditions, then we having a fertilization in vitro condition, and then we are transferring the embryo back into the uterus. These are the three steps. So I hope they are clear to you. So they are transferred back into the uterus after 2, 3, or 5 days of development. Embryos reaching the blastocyst stage on day 5 of the development usually exhibit the best chance of implantation. So this is an important thing. The embryos reaching the blastocyst stage on the day 5, it means they are good and healthy enough, and they have grown enough. So they are reaching on the day 5 in the blastocyst stage on the day 5, and they have a best chance of implantation. Now coming up to embryo transfer or ET. Okay, now we are transferring the embryo into the uterine cavity. The embryos are transferred into the uterus using a soft plastic catheter. The choice of how many embryos to be transferred. This is another important issue to be referred to. Uh, the choice of how many embryos to be transferred is the decision of the couple following expert medical and embryological advice, and this may be constrained by the local regulatory or funding parameters. So the embryos are transferred usually performed in the transabdominal ultrasound control to ensure correct placement of the embryo. By a soft plastic catheter, the patient is placed in the lithotomy position and with the speculum, and slowly through the cervical canal the plastic catheter or cannula is introduced, and into the uterine cavity the embryo is transferred. So under transabdominal ultrasound control, and they are correctly placed inside the uterine cavity. Embryo cryopreservation in the modern countries is always done, and in our country as well, the embryos are cryopreserved, and according to the convenience and facilities, then they are transferred as well. Now, progesterone support is always required. With the luteal phase support, we always need, if the embryo is transferred, as we also know that in cases of threatened miscarriages and where there is a risk of pregnancy failure, we are giving progesterone support, which is supported by the literature now. Similar is in the case of IVF cycles, we are giving progesterone support to the early pregnancy after the embryo transfer. So luteal phase support is given, and the use of gonadotropin agonist or antagonist to prevent a premature LH surge will lead to a reduction in the ability of the corpus luteum to produce progesterone. As the IVF cycles were under the control of gonadotropin agonist or antagonist, and now we learn that but the side effect of this control was that the LH surges, the premature LH surges have prevented the optimum progesterone level. So we need to have a progesterone support as well in our these controlled cycles. So patients are therefore supplemented with progesterone following the egg collection. A pregnancy test is performed around 14 days after embryo transfer. This is very important. Okay. So what is about the artificial reproductive technique success rates? You see, the IVF success rates are executively sensitive to the female age. This is very important. If the young patients, they are under the age of, in the young patients under the age of 35, the sex rates can be as high as 40 to 45% from each and single cycle. But in women over the age of 40, they will fall below the percentage of around 15%. So you see, the age matters. The age matters because, as we know, simply as the age progresses, the follicles, the number of follicles, they all fall. An important thing that is to discuss about the risk of IVF is that IVF has a similar risk as in any pregnancy. There are risk of miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies as well. Another particular important risk of IVF is the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. It is the most significant risk of IVF. As we are stimulating the follicles, there can be ovarian hyperstimulation. As we are stimulating the ovaries, because of the ovulation inducing agents, there can be a risk of ovarian hyperstimulation, and it is about 1 to 3% of the cases. These patients present with ascites and large multifollicular ovaries, the edema, coagulopathy. It can be life endangering as well. So these patients need to be admitted to the hospital and managed under strict protocol under the care of specialist teams. Prevention can be done by a good control, by using the low dose stimulations. Protocols should be monitored in a proper way, and there should be a more liberal freezing policy. That when we need if it happens, then the embryo should be freezed, or a collection should be done and can be used whenever there are suitable conditions. An important thing what to be discussed is, I know you are getting bored and tired, but my dear students, these are all your textbooks, and we have to cover these things because they are mostly coming in your UHS exams as well. An important thing in cases of IVF to be considered is about the pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. The couples who carry a genetic disease but who are fertile may choose to use IVF and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to avoid an unaffected pregnancy. And okay, an affected pregnancy. So these patients may previously have had affected children or terminations for an affected fetus. So IVF will create multiple embryos. These embryos can be genetically tested for relevant diseases, and therefore, if the embryos have a relevant disease, they are not going to be implanted. So the removal of several cells at the blastocyst stage are tested and taken to reflect the genotype of the remaining embryo. This is what we are doing in pre-genetic diagnosis. Only the embryos free of the disease are transferred into the uterus of a healthy pregnancy for a healthy pregnancy. This is the main theme behind pre-genetic diagnosis. PGD is now being used worldwide for most monogenic diseases as well as for translocations. The use of PGD for social sex selection is illegal in UK and many other countries. So this was the purpose of PGD as a support for us and as a help for us in cases for the couples who have suffered in cases of genetic diseases, where the embryo selection which is free of the disease and then thus for successful implantation is the goal and the aim for a couple who is keen to have a healthy pregnancy. So thank you very much for your learning. Stay blessed.